Welcome to the Debrief, where we talk to the Washington Examiner's top journalists about the headlines they're covering this week and where the story's going next. I'm Jim Antle. I'm joined today by senior political columnist Tim Carney. Tim, there's a lot of confusion about what's going on with inflation. It's been a persistent economic issue. It's been the biggest political issue in this midterm election year. President Joe Biden has come out with a new talking point. He's patient zero. He said there was zero inflation last month, getting a lot of pushback for that. What's really going on?
Bottom line is that in the month of July, after having risen for 16 months or so, prices flatlined, which means they're still 8.5% higher than they were the year before.
Right.
But if you were to compare June to July, the whole sort of basket of prices stayed at the same price. Now, there's lots of turbulence under that flat layer. Gas prices fell, and that was a huge part of the rise earlier. And food prices still went up significantly in July, and so that's going to hit a lot of families. But averaging everything out, the simplest way to look at it is this: the massive inflation we've experienced for over the last year kind of it flattened out this summer.
So, I mean, that does raise an interesting question. One, economically, in that we tend to define inflation in terms of the rise of these prices, but it doesn't necessarily describe the phenomena where people think their cost of living is still too high, even after that levels off. But also the political question for Biden and the Democrats is they obviously want to take some credit or at least call attention to the fact that some of this stuff seems to be stabilizing. But if prices are too high for people, do they risk being perceived to be out of touch?
It's a common thing throughout the Biden administration where they think if we just message clearly enough that things are going well, that it will become reality that things were going well. They did this with the Afghanistan withdrawal. They've done this repeatedly. I think it's a symptom of having such coziness with most of the news media that they believe, oh, we can just have a Sunday night phone call where we put out the message to the reporters and everything is clear. But again, if your groceries are going up at 13% a year, and they're still going up when Biden is saying things are fine, and things are still so much higher than they were a year before, it really does run the risk of them looking out of touch. But on the other hand, if we flatlined at this point, and this flatlining of prices continues through November, yes, prices will still be higher in November 2022 than they were in November 21, but it will take the edge off of what really is the Republicans' strongest attack, which is constantly rising prices.
Now, every president does this, but I think in this current economic situation, it's been very conspicuous that the Biden administration does this, is that when there is bad news, because we've had a lot of mixed economic news that varies from month to month, when things are bad, their policies have nothing whatsoever to do with it. But when they have good news to report, it is irrefutable proof that their policies are working. And that does become kind of conspicuous, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I mean, I think that voters and the news media attribute too much to presidential administrations in the economy. But the inflation problem, really, Biden does have to own that, because his party was one of the two parties pushing to increase spending in late 2020, but then in early 2021, he comes out with his American Rescue Plan, which obviously was a huge thing that instigated the massive inflation that followed. So in this case, he actually does have his fingerprints on the runaway inflation. But we are the masters of low employment, and we had nothing to we were the masters of low unemployment, but we had nothing to do with rising prices. That's a sort of dance that's not very convincing, and it does look like buck passing. But the fact is, if unemployment stays this low and we're able to coast out of the massive inflation without a recession, if that happens somehow by November, I think the Democrats will be looking very good, because right now the Republicans' number one attack is a runaway inflation. If somehow that weapon is taken away from them, then I don't think you can look for the massive gains that some Republicans are predicting.
How does the Inflation Reduction Act play into this?
Nobody actually believes that the Inflation Reduction Act reduces inflation. The title is simple messaging. It accomplishes lots of long-time Democratic goals of getting climate stuff out there, of subsidizing more electric cars, etc. I think most bills passed in Congress don't have a big impact on how voters vote. They just slapped a name that sounded good on a bill that accomplished some of their longtime priorities.
Thank you, Tim. You can read Tim and the rest of our political team's coverage at washingtonexaminer.com.